Good morning. How's everyone doing? Happy Thursday, May 11th. It is 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and this is the first episode of Season 2 of Yoga Corner Chats. So before I go too much deeper, I'm just going to take a moment to invite our guest, who I'll introduce in just a moment. I am so excited to be back for Season 2. That brings you inspiring conversations with women who have made their mark in the world of wellness and entrepreneurship. Hi, Becky.
Hi.
You made it on. I'm so happy. So for those of you who don't know me, I am your host, Shelby Phoenix. I am a yoga instructor, mindset coach, and owner of the Yoga Corner, and I empower yoga teachers to succeed as entrepreneurs through authentic marketing and mindset coaching. And today on Yoga Corner Chat, we are joined by Becky Aten. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Aten.
I just want to make sure it's right. Awesome. Becky is an openly autistic and ADHD yoga practitioner and teacher, nature lover, and self-identified nerd. Their teaching approach is grounded in lived experience and follows a neurodiversity-affirming framework to help make yoga more accessible to all brains and bodies. And in this episode, we'll be discussing the topic of affirming neurodiversity, exploring what it means to be neurodiversity-affirming, and why it's so important for the long-term mental health of neurodivergent people. We'll also be diving into Becky's experiences as a neurodivergent yoga teacher and exploring how we can all work towards creating a more inclusive and accessible yoga practice. And I actually stumbled upon Becky's website when I was doing my own research about just yoga and neurodiversity in general. And I automatically felt the pull to ask her to be a guest on the podcast. So I'm so excited to welcome you on. How are you doing today?
I'll be honest, it's allergy season, and yeah, sometimes that brings a little bit of a brain fog. So I'm hanging in the best I can, but my voice is good today, so that's a plus.
I want to send gratitude for taking the time to join me today on this interview.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my phone to stay.
No worries. Whatever you need to do to feel
Here we go.
Prepared. Before we go any further in the interview, I like to start these lives by leading us through a few deep breaths. Is that okay with you?
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I totally need it every time. It doesn't ever get easier. All right. If it's possible, plant your feet firmly on the floor or the ground. And if it feels safe to do so, I invite you to close your eyes and just sit up nice and tall if that's possible. And I invite anyone listening to join us as well. Use your belly to push all the air out of your lungs until you're completely empty. And then begin to slowly inhale through your nose, filling your belly, expanding your rib cage, and filling all the way up to your collarbone. And then letting all the air out your mouth. We'll do that again. Another deep breath in through the nose, belly, rib cage, collarbone. And let it all go. One last big deep belly breath. Fill up. And get empty. And whenever you're ready, gently open up your eyes. Come back to this space. I wanted to give you the opportunity, Becky, to introduce yourself
Sure,
and what you do.
I feel a little bit like the phrase jack of all trades, master life. I am I am a yoga teacher and a entrepreneur. I have a project I started right after I graduated from my 200-hour yoga teacher training called Yoga for Neurodiversity, which is what you were obviously referring to, how we found each other here. But that's just one very small piece of kind of who I am in the world. And I work for another organization full-time because my yoga project at this point in this phase at the beginning isn't enough to sustain my livelihood. But the other work that I do is really well aligned from the perspective of values. It's social work. It's working with a lot of neurodivergent people. And I get to use some of my strengths that come along with my neurotype, like having a knack for rules, working in human resources and understanding labor laws and stuff like that. And then I get to teach a little bit of yoga at the other job. And then I also work with the local autism society here in southeastern Wisconsin with other adults on the spectrum. So I was facilitating a social support group and recently just kind of decided to take a step back and be a participant again. I need the support of a community. Can't always be the one leading every time. So
and you have your energy in a lot of different spaces where you are supporting other people. So that makes a lot of sense. So we're talking about neurodivergency, and before we get too deep into that topic, I think a lot of people don't know what that means. I was wondering if you could define that and like maybe any other terms or just basics that people would find beneficial to understand the rest of the conversation.
So I will start with the word neurodiversity. It's kind of a big word, but if you break it down, it's really neuro, which is a word that just means pertaining to the nervous system, meaning our brain, our spinal cord, all the peripheral nerves that run through our body into our limbs. So it's not just the function of the brain, but the entire body that's innervated. Right. And diversity meaning differences. So it is just a term that used to describe the natural variations in nervous systems amongst human beings. And fun fact, also, the term itself was coined by an autistic person, Judy Singer, who is a sociologist. So she in the 90s, and it's made its way into 2023. So
I actually was a classroom teacher for 4 years before and like leading up to COVID, and there's a lot of kids in my class and in my school that were neurodivergent, and I sat through like I don't know how many like special ed type meetings, and I never heard that word one time until TikTok.
So it's definitely not a medical term, but more of a term, more of a social term. But it's been used now so much like within the medical community that I think it's just important to acknowledge that while it's an important term, and it just like the word biodiversity, it can be used in a lot of contexts. It does have its roots in the neurodivergent community, and that's probably another good word to define because people might know what that means. But neurodivergent is a term also coined by an autistic person, Kassiani Asasumasu, in like about the year 2000. So, and this is a term that was originally meant to be used to describe anyone with a nervous system that significantly diverges from what essentially the majority of other people's would look like. But more so,
Right.
not even necessarily that looks like the majority of others, but just looks like what we as a culture, expect nervous systems to look like or function like. So,
Yes.
and I think there is, at least now, a tendency for people to use the word neurodivergent to describe things like autism and ADHD, which are considered innate forms of neurodivergent, meaning they've got a genetic component. We're born with a nervous system that develops differently from the get-go. But I do want to, I guess, clarify that the original term was intended to include also acquired neurodivergence, which is a fancy way of saying differences in the nervous system, of the physiology of the nervous system that resulted from environmental experiences.
Right.
So like traumatic experiences, physical or emotional or psychological trauma, like a physical injury, for example, or even using a lot of like drugs can alter the nervous system, or even a long-term meditation practice can significantly.
Yeah. So that makes the term
yes,
quite broad.
So just keep in mind, I think a lot of people are used to hearing it used as a way to describe innate neurodivergence, but it is meant to describe anybody who recognizes themselves as having a nervous system that is significantly different from the majority of others in their environment.
Yeah. And also, like, some of these terms are like umbrella terms, right? And I'm kind of imagining like the spokes go in kind of all different ways, right? Like there's like a spectrum of ways you can be neurodivergent, whether it's innate or environmental, a range of like conditions or disorders that might be identified under that. And then within all of those variations, there's like a spectrums and overlap within all of those as well.
And again, probably if you look at it as an umbrella, you would see things like Down syndrome, ADHD and autism, we've already mentioned, epilepsy and other seizure disorders, but also personality disorders, mood disorders, all these other diagnoses that you can find in the DSM, but also people who may not be diagnosed, because the reality is you can be neurodivergent and not know it.
Yeah.
And find out that like
totally.
Your whole life you were working in a different operating system and wondering why you maybe felt like you were failing constantly. And the reality is that there was never anything wrong with me. For example, I'll speak from my own. I just didn't recognize how I was different, because kind of like a fish doesn't know it's in water. Yeah.
Yes.
You don't talk about the way that we learn and think in school, for example, to understand that, like, this kid I'm sitting next to we're in the same class and we're learning the same material, but we are picking up completely different pieces of information along the way.
Yeah.
And our paths to understanding are going to have a totally different timeline. Oh,
right. I can just relate to all of that so much, because I was just in September diagnosed with ADHD, but also something I had never even heard of, which isn't even technically a diagnosis, which is nonverbal learning disability or disorder. And I was like, wait, I'm so confused. Like, how did I not know this my whole life? And like, what does this even mean? And some of it actually means you have like really crazy strengths in certain areas. And when I look back, I can see things in my life, like from beginning to current, that are like, how did no one see this? Like, so like what you were just saying, I just resonate with a lot. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question, if you feel it's relevant to answer, is like, what has been your journey with kind of realizing that your brain was a little different?
You know, I liken it a little bit to the journey of exploring, you know, gender identity or sexual orientation. You know, I identify as queer, and that's not something that like, there's a test out there that you can take. And I think although with certain forms of neurodivergence, like ADHD, you know, there are obviously diagnostic criteria, and you go to a doctor and get a diagnosis. But at the same time, diagnosis isn't always accessible. So if you are going through life and you've just always felt a little bit like maybe you were born on the wrong planet, or born in the wrong era, or there's something that everybody knows that they're not telling you and you can't figure out, like, that might be a clue that there's some neurodivergence that you haven't been diagnosed with yet, or you just haven't stumbled on the label for yet. So I think that most of my life, I knew that there was something different because kids at school treated me differently. It was a lot easier for me to talk to adults than to talk to my peers. And I always felt like, for that reason, like, there was, even though academically I did well in school, like, I felt like there was something wrong with me fundamentally, that I didn't seem to have the same social aptitudes that my peers did. And the way that I spoke, I think, made me come across as pretentious, and some of it is a little bit of an art. Like, I wasn't feeling competent, so I was trying to overcompensate for that by vocabulary. And in any case, like, I went through my life like that, and it honestly had a huge impact on my mental health. By the time I was a teenager, I was really pretty significantly depressed, to the point where, you know, I was hospitalized several times in my, you know, young adulthood. And it wasn't until my mid-20s that after like many years of therapy and lots of different psychotropic medications, I finally was referred to a psychologist who had knowledge of ADHD and how it presents in people who are assigned female at birth. I got an ADHD diagnosis in my mid-20s. But at the time, there wasn't as much, the information about ADHD wasn't as accessible as it is now, I think. So I didn't know how or what that meant for me. I didn't really know where to go from there, as far as what does this mean for my needs and how do I meet them? And even as I started to get more an understanding of myself from that perspective, it still didn't answer all the questions about why I was struggling. And I was still struggling a lot, going through periods of burnout, what I would think of as like a regression, I called it, where I would behave in ways that I'm like, I haven't acted this way since childhood. Like, what is wrong with me? And eventually I thanks to the internet, stumbled on I think it was a YouTube video of a woman talking about being diagnosed autistic as an adult. And I had this whole physiological reaction listening to it, because it was so similar to my own upbringing and experiences. And that led led over
Yeah.
time, long story short, to seeking out a doctor who could diagnose autism in adults who was experienced, which is also hard to find, and then getting what kind of that
Yeah.
last missing piece of information about my neurotype, my identity,
Yeah.
which really opened doors. It gave me a vocabulary to talk about experiences that I didn't even know were different from most other people's, and helped me connect to other
Yeah.
people who shared my experiences and could understand in a way that I could. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think that sometimes when people don't understand like why you would need a diagnosis, or like even maybe their kids, like why would you pursue this as an adult? And I think part of it is just feeling like validated, like your experiences are validated, your like intuition was correct, like something was off, you're not like, you know, crazy, or like, because people second guess you too, or you get diagnosed with all sorts of different things, try all sorts of different medications. It's like once you have an answer, it's just kind of a relief in
I
a way.
felt a
Did you feel
profound
that?
sense of relief. Yes. And I didn't realize how isolated I was feeling. It wasn't that I didn't have friends or that I didn't have moments of joy and happiness. I did. But it just felt like in most of my relationships, the role had to be so specific for me to have a relationship with someone. It was so, I couldn't be myself.
Yeah.
As now I've come to understand, I couldn't unmask, and allow like autistic traits to just show. Like I had to, depending on whatever the relationship was, if it was professional, you know, I had to always wear this professional hat. So it was like, you know, kind of like this
Yeah.
metaphor of like I had a hat rack. I had a different hat for each person that I had a relationship with, and it, yeah, never take the hat off when I was with them.
That was going to be my next question, because I think that this is important also, is like when you were defining neurodivergent, it's divergent from like the norm. And the norm, like the research on a lot of these things is done on like men and boys, like white men and boys, cisgender white men and boys, like decades ago. And a lot of that information is still like carried into today. Luckily that's changing and there's more information available. But in addition to that complication of like trying to figure out what's going on, also there's like how society treats you know, little girls, even, like, you know, so that they do end up masking their symptoms, making it harder to navigate that. I wonder if you have any like insights into that kind of history.
And if you're like me and you really want to nerd out about it, I can share some resources for diving deeper. But so it's true that the majority of our knowledge about, and I'll use autism as an example because it's what I'm most familiar with.
Yeah.
Our knowledge about autism comes from studies that were done primarily in the early days anyway, with, as you said, cisgender white boys and men, who oftentimes also represented more of like the middle or upper class. So it wasn't until recently that there's actual information now available on what autism looks like in Black people, in people assigned female at birth, women, trans people, and also like people who aren't from the upper middle class. So it's not, but it's also, you know, considering, I'll just say, like, you know, I see a therapist, and she's older, she's like retirement age, and her studies were done, you know, like in the 60s and 70s, when nothing was really known about autism. And in her case, like, she hadn't really ever gone back to learn the new information. And that's true for a lot of mental health professionals, that, you know, you learn what you learn, and then, you know, you might get into a specialization where you have a lot of knowledge about a very, very narrow subject. But unless that subject is like autism or whatever the neurodivergences that you want to support, chances are you're operating on outdated information and stereotypes, and that can be really, really harmful. Because in the case of autism, for example, you know, when we talk about autism in the general population, you ask just a random person what they know about autism, more likely than not, you're going to get references to popular culture, like the film Rain Man, or like, you know, other movies or TV shows where autistic characters are represented, but not necessarily in a way that is inclusive or represented in the full spectrum of human diversity and intersectionality. So so I guess, to answer your question, there is a gap in what we know about how autism presents and how other forms of neurodivergence present if you're not a white guy.
I think that was important when I learned that, because I had that stereotype of, like, at least ADHD in my head, like, it's the bouncy boy. Like, I didn't even think adults could have it, honestly. Like, and I was like, oh, there's something different in women, and I read it, and it was like so far from the stereotype. I was like, oh wow.
So many of the, you know, women and non-binary folks that have diagnoses like autism and ADHD tend to share that a lot of their experiences are very internal. They're not really obvious. So which, you know, kind of makes sense that we fly under the radar, because if we're not internally, like, displaying all these obvious signs of being different, nobody's going to question whether or not we might have this diagnosis, unless, as an adult, we start to learn more about ourselves and be like, yeah, there's something here. There's something here that I was missing. There's some information about myself. So, yeah.
So what does it mean to be neurodiversity affirming, and what does it mean in the context of yoga?
So I think the simplest way I can describe it is just to be neurodiversity affirming. So is to acknowledge and perhaps even celebrate the fact that we are all different. And it doesn't mean, you know, and neurodiversity, I should say the word, you know, if we're using the word neurodiverse or neurodiversity, this is inclusive of neurodivergent people, and also a term called neurotypical. So a neurotypical is not synonymous with normal. It's just a term that's used to describe people who meet what we consider like most neuronormative expectations. The way that society thinks a person's nervous system should function, if you function close enough to that you're not disabled, chances are you're neurotypical. So so anyway, that there's that diversity. There's whether you're neurodivergent or not, and we don't know by looking at somebody whether they have a diagnosis of any kind, whether they're neurodivergent. And even people who aren't neurodivergent are going to have traits that might fall within, you know, like the autism spectrum. So these are all human traits. We just categorize them according to like what diagnosis they might be most commonly seen alongside of. So where I'm going with this is kind of funneling all of these differences down into the simple idea that we are all different. whether we have a diagnosis or not.
Yeah.
We all have traits that make us different from one another, and all of those differences deserve to be accepted and also supported. So our needs matter, and sometimes we have needs that are very, very different. They might look different, and for that reason we might not even recognize in ourselves like that this is a need, that or even how to go about asking for support around it, because it's not something that we've ever seen or heard talked about by other people. It's not
Right.
it's not a neurotypical need.
Right.
So to be neurodiversity affirming is to acknowledge this diversity and to say that differences are normal. It's normal to be different. All differences deserve acceptance and support.
Yeah. I'm kind of wondering, like, if there's someone, a yoga teacher or anyone else who just like functions in the world who is neurotypical, why do you think affirming neurodiversity like could be something that's important to them, or maybe something they could consider exploring a little bit more?
I think a lot of us get messages from people in our lives, whether it's parents, teachers, the media, social media, movies, TV, what have you, that there's a right or a wrong way to be. And it can lead us, and I'm saying us, but I'm speaking from my own experience as usual. Like, I felt like there was something about me that needed to be fixed. And until I got to a place of accepting that it's okay to be different, I was constantly feeling like a failure, and trying to, like, I found journal entries from my teenage years where I was, writing things about fixing my flaws all the time. And when you live with this feeling of like that there's something wrong with you, it has a profound and impact on mental health. So it's really important for people to get the opposite message, that being different is normal, and even to celebrate differences, rather than trying to celebrate conformity, because it is going to help people feel included. And the more that even neurotypical people accept and highlight and celebrate their differences, the more that gives, I don't know if permission is the right word, but permission for those of us who are neurodivergent to openly do the same and not feel like we're going to be socially rejected.
Like creating like space, a little space in the room or on the table.
And I don't know if I said I think there was your question that I didn't answer.
Oh. Well, how does being neurodiversity affirming like make yoga more accessible in general?
So I'll offer a couple of like specific examples. There are a lot of ways that a person can come about finding the practice of yoga. So that could be, living in a community that has a yoga studio, and you take a class. It could be finding it through a book at the library, finding it on YouTube, like finding a video about yoga on YouTube. And depending on like what path you take to learn and get introduced to yoga, it can create a relationship with the practice of yoga that either encourages you to continue or maybe shuts it down as like, this is not for me.
Right.
Perhaps I worry. But because yoga and mindfulness are so important to my own self-care needs, like I want people to be introduced to it in a way that makes them feel like it's for them, regardless of who they are and where they are in life. And if their only exposure to yoga are Instagram accounts, for example, where people are showing off their inversion practice. You know, bodies are beautiful,
Right.
and that's all good stuff. But that's not accessible for most people on a physical level. And if people
Right.
aren't seeing all the different ways that yoga poses and practices can be done, different bodies and different brains, then it may turn them off to a practice that otherwise could have immense health benefits and provide them with an opportunity for connection with themselves and with others. So in a yoga practice, having, as a teacher, for example, having an understanding of at least some of the ways that that people differ in the way that they think and feel and interact with the world can help inform some of the options that you offer, to make sure that you're never going to be able to offer cues that are for every single person on the planet. Like, so don't worry about like, I know inclusivity is important, but I don't think it's possible for every single class to be completely inclusive for every single human being on the planet. That's a lot. It's a big ask. But think about like who you want to teach to, and if you're offering a centering practice that, you know, you're asking people to be seated and stay still, consider that maybe for some people stillness can create a lot of anxiety or discomfort to the point where it's a barrier, and offer a movement option. So it's really, I think we get it in our heads when we use these terms, like neurodiversity affirming is this big word, and it has like, I have to get a certification now so I can be a neuroaffirming yoga teacher. No, you don't have to. Just start thinking about other people, get to know people who are different from you, talk to people who are different from you, so you can start to get an understanding of how they're approaching the practice differently, and then how you teach. It's just, you have to start somewhere. You don't have to start with every single inclusive practice that's out there. It's just start somewhere. Start by just listening to people who are different from you, and then seeing where that takes you as far as.
I had another guest, Maddie. If you're listening, Maddie, hi. And we were talking about chronic illness and yoga, and she said something so similar about accessibility and being inclusive, and how that word can just be popped into like a description of any yoga class, and then like, you know, and kind of like in the energy of trying to help everyone, like
exactly,
you help no one, like.
And I think it's normal for there to be this drive for perfectionism in our culture. So, and yoga teachers aren't immune. We have egos too. You know, I know, like I teach a class, and I want everybody to get the maximum benefit, but the reality is that that's not going to happen, at least not to the extent I think I want it to. But if I can send them a message at the end of the class, that they don't have to do what I tell them, that if a practice isn't serving them, that there's always another option they can take, and that they don't need for me to tell them that they can take it. Like, I've done my job, because I've given them that sense of bodily autonomy and choice. This is your practice. And there is no right or wrong way to practice yoga. It's a practice of connection. So however you connect to your mind and your body is the right way. So.
I teach kids yoga, middle school kids mostly, and, you know, like, they often are not like there by choice, or like not interested in what I'm doing. And I always say, like, you don't even have to participate. Just lay down on the floor and you are doing yoga. And like, you have this choice, like no other place in school do you get this amount of freedom. And like 9 times out of 10 by the end, they're like, okay, I want to join it.
I like to say at the beginning of my classes, observing is learning too. Like, the pay
Yeah.
is valid, and I don't take it personally. Like if he just lays on the mat during the entire class. But again, like that's how
Yep.
we're neurodiversity affirming. We are not making any assumptions about the experience someone is having just because it might not show on their or in their
Yeah.
words. Like,
Yeah.
I have to trust that they are listening and taking in, and they're making the choices that are right for them.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that is like
Yes.
empowering them as well. For you, like in the realm of teaching yoga or even being a yoga practitioner, how have you set boundaries or, asked for created accommodations
Yeah.
for yourself?
So when I graduated from my yoga teacher training, it was like right in the middle of lockdown 2020. And
Yeah.
a lot of people were moving from doing things in person to a digital platform. And I found for
Yeah.
myself that actually opened a lot of doors for me, because I had already I am the kind of person that is very impacted by the energy in the room, so to speak, when people.
Yeah.
The person teaching was really, I didn't hate it, but it was really, really, really draining for me. And I just decided, like I needed a place to start to practice teaching. So I just decided to
Yeah.
start recording videos and putting them on YouTube. And I realized in doing that was probably what my teaching was going to look like. Not a lot of,
Yeah.
going to studios and standing in front of classrooms and teaching to rooms full of people, IRL, so to speak. But offering
Right.
videos or virtual options, and more in a workshop format, because I am at heart, like I love to info dump, or as I say, info dump from the heart. I love to present information, and in a workshop
Yeah.
format, I have the opportunity to give people experiences of practicing, but also explain, some of this practice is all about,
Yeah.
like the history, or the options that I'm going to offer and why I'm offering them. And everybody's
Right.
everybody's learning style is different, and if I can offer information and then a way to integrate it into the body, for me that's really fulfilling,
Yeah.
because that's the way I enjoy doing that.
Yep.
And if someone else learns that way, great. And if not, there are millions of other yoga teachers. So you can go find, you can go
Right. Yeah.
keep going and find somebody who speaks in the way that connects best for you. But it took a lot of pressure off me to recognize that I didn't have to go out and teach classes in a public studio in order to be a yoga teacher. I also didn't have to teach anything that was beyond what I already understood. I could keep it simple, and which is what I still do. Even after a couple of years of teaching, I don't try to teach people how to do crow pose. I'm more likely even to, I don't do flow classes. I will just teach kind of standalone practices, most of which
Yep.
are practices out of my own daily self-care that I can offer to other people in hopes that maybe it's beneficial for them, that don't require a lot of, you don't have to worry about safety. There's not a whole lot of like alignment to think about, more about
Right.
the connection with the body and trying to have an experience that feels good.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people, yoga teachers, people who practice yoga, that like I used to work at a studio where it was like, if you're a yoga teacher here, you have to come here and take a full 1 hour, 90-degree vinyasa class. And if you don't come at least 3 times a week, like you're basically a hypocrite. And like, it has to be like you're dying at the end, or it's not really like a yoga class. and or like, you know, if I'm a yoga teacher, I have to be teaching at a studio or leading retreats or doing whatever, or I'm not a real yoga teacher. If I'm not posting this, you know, these poses on Instagram, I'm not a real yoga teacher. But I feel like part of being affirming to differences is like, we don't all have to be the same yoga teacher. You don't have to practice every day. If you don't want to, you can lie on your own floor. Like, just
when I one-on-one yoga with people, and sometimes it is like I'll for example, I have a client I work with who I created you know, a morning mindfulness practice with a visual guide, pictures of the practices, and it was like, you know, a 5-minute maybe practice. It doesn't have to be like a whole hour of yoga to count every little practice. And as you know, I'm sure, it just continues to reinforce that muscle memory, so that maybe one day when you're feeling really anxious, you'll remember that you have this tool in your toolkit, and you'll use it and find that it offers some relief in the moment. Nothing in yoga and the practices, you know, asana or pranayama, so breath and movement, are going to cure anxiety or depression. They are tools, and yeah, teaching people those tools, and practicing them even just for a couple minutes is a yoga practice. So
yeah. This question just came into my head. I noticed, like, I've heard this message a lot as far as like mental health, like depression and stuff. Like, you know, in the wellness space, people will sometimes say like, you don't need to take your medication, just like practice yoga and take nature walks, and like kind of like that toxic, like, this is your cure all or whatever, like, or like if you do yoga, like that doesn't even exist or whatever. I'm wondering, like, what have you experienced in yoga spaces that maybe are more harmful or didn't feel affirming?
You know, one of the biggest things for me, and I can't even pinpoint like one specific time that this happened, because it just happens so often, is when I show up for like a class and the teacher cues how I'm going to feel. And when the first time I did a meditation practice that was focused on the breath, and the teacher was saying something like, just let your breath be how it is, don't try to control it. The moment that word came, control, of course I'm trying to control my breath, like I can't breathe, and all of a sudden I'm in a panic attack, and it was horrible. And I don't think that most people have that experience, but I do think that there are enough people who have that experience, that it's worth considering it as a yoga teacher. Why you're trying to tell someone how they should feel, rather than simply allow for all sensations and all feelings, every single practice that you offer, because that's being neurodiversity affirming. It's recognizing that just because most people might feel a certain way, most people might feel relaxed in Shavasana, doesn't mean everybody will. I didn't feel relaxed in Shavasana anytime I was in a public class, because especially if my eyes were closed, I was always like thinking someone was going to step on me. And it's really hard to get the nervous system to a place of calm.
Then you're just like kind of paranoid, that hypervigilance, and not like relaxed.
It's reality. So I think the biggest thing for me is just not telling people how they should feel, or making them feel like if they don't feel relaxed in a certain pose that they're doing it wrong. Giving people space to feel what they feel, what that is. And I always like to remind my students, And if you feel nothing, if you don't know what you feel, and if you feel nothing at all, that's normal too. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, how do you think, do you have like any things that's specific that is a practice or something supportive that could make yoga spaces more welcoming, more supportive, more affirming?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, you know, at one point in time, I would probably speak to like the sensory environment. And I do think that it's worth mentioning, that the way that a person enters a space, like if you're talking about a brick and mortar studio, or the way that a person enters a virtual space, even, you know, whether or not you're providing people with an email ahead of time or something that gives them a sense of what to expect, that can make a big difference.
Yeah. And
regardless of, like, you know, what form of neurodivergence someone has, there tends to be a lot of anxiety in the neurodivergent community. So providing information about what to expect and making allowances for human beings, for our biology, for our biological responses, like, you know, having a culture where somebody can get up in the middle of a class and go to the bathroom if they have to without feeling like they're interrupting, or even having a culture where somebody can ask a question. How radical is that, in the middle of a class out loud? Like,
it's pretty radical.
Because I feel like in so many classes I go to, there's a lot of rigidity. And even if the teacher doesn't mean for there to be, it's just kind of like, if no one else is getting up and going to the bathroom or asking questions in the middle of the class, like, I have permission to do it. So giving that permission, and showing, and if you're a yoga teacher and you're going to public classes as a student, like, the most radical thing that you can do is meet your needs, even if it's not what the teacher is cueing or offering, because that's going to give all the students permission, totally. The same. And I think so I don't know, maybe I've like gotten off track of, I don't even remember what your question was.
No, those were really great tips on like how to create a more affirming space. It just reminded me, a few weeks ago, I was subbing at a studio and I play music in my classes, and this one woman, like in the middle of class, was just like, excuse me, like, I can't like hear you and the words in the music at the same time. Like, I just can't hear both at the same time. And I was like, thank you. Like, I am going to turn it off and that's it. Like, it's fine. And afterwards I went up and I just said, thank you, like, for letting me know, because otherwise I wouldn't have known. And like, I want to create a space like it's your class. Like, it's fine.
That, to me, that is such a gift to have created a space where somebody feels safe enough to speak up and ask for their needs to be met. Like, that just doesn't happen a lot. And
it's so true.
Is permission to ask for what we need. So
we're coming towards the end of this hour, and I probably could ask you like 500 more questions, but to kind of come to a close, I'm wondering if there's anything else you want to share, any other like experiences you've had, any other tips or strategies for anyone listening, or just any messages you want to end with.
Let's see. Well, I think I'll keep it really simple and just say, you know, when I do a lot of when I do neurodiversity presentations, I like to remind people that because we are all different, we are all special, or none of us are, and we are all normal, or none of us are, because what's normal for me is different from for you. And I think it can just be really validating to be reminded that whatever your experiences are, whether they're similar to other people or not, that those experiences are just as valid, and it's whatever your needs are, even if you don't know what they are, which is totally normal too. Like, those needs deserve to be met. And if you are finding yourself feeling like the people around you maybe aren't having the same experiences and aren't as understanding, it's okay, like, to explore whether you might be neurodivergent, even if you don't have a formal diagnosis. And you don't necessarily need a formal diagnosis to be part of the neurodivergent community. Neurodivergence it's not a medical diagnosis. It's more of a social label. And you get to decide if you feel like that label fits for you. And to join the neurodivergent community, it's not like you got to go to and sign up for anything. Yeah. No, it's weird. You're like, this label fits for me. This feels, I relate more to the experiences of other neurodivergent people. So there is no right or wrong way, in my opinion, for anyone to identify, and you don't have to prove anything to anybody to give yourself a label of neurodivergent if that's supportive for you. So that's where I think that's where I'll end, is just with this message that it's okay to be different, and it's also okay to seek out more information about yourself if you've gone through life feeling like there was just a piece of information that was missing, that would help you to better meet your needs.
Yeah. Seeking information in a way is filling a need, like just like allowing yourself to be curious.
Right. The self-study in the practice, which is so yoga practice isn't always physical. There are intellectual pieces to it. Learning and studying yourself doesn't always have to be done on a yoga mat.
Yeah. I'm so grateful that you took this time to share your knowledge with us and your experiences. I really appreciate your time and everything you've shared with us. So thank you so much for joining. I'll be publishing this episode on Monday if things go well.
Fun. I enjoy nerding out about neurodiversity. So
awesome. Well, maybe we can do it again sometime, because we could do like 16 different episodes on like just this topic. All right,
take care,
friend. Thank you so much. Have a great day.